When we picture medieval warfare, our minds usually jump to knights and shining armor, right? Glorious battles for honor and king. But today, we're going to strip all that fantasy away and get into the grim, absolutely terrifying reality for the average person who was forced to fight. This isn't a story about glory, it's about survival. Just let that sink in for a second. This wasn't some noble calling. For the vast majority of people, it was basically a death sentence handed down by a lord or a king who would never even learn their name. Their stories have been completely swallowed up by the legends of heroes, and that's what we're here to dig into.
Okay, so first things first, let's tackle that romantic storybook image of medieval combat head on. It's a powerful myth for sure, but man, it just completely falls apart the second you look at what was actually happening on the ground.
Yeah, the myth we've all been sold is one of glory, of honor, of epic clashes between heroes. But the reality for a regular soldier, it was something else entirely. It was overwhelming fear, a desperate moment-to-moment scramble for survival, and the raw, brutal, disorganized chaos of a real battlefield. So who were these soldiers, really? How did an ordinary guy, a farmer, end up getting yanked from his life and thrown onto the front lines of a war? Yeah, we're not talking about professional warriors here. These were farmers pulled straight from their fields, blacksmiths from their forges, just ordinary people whose lives were turned completely upside down. Your only real qualification for being a soldier was having a pulse and being strong enough to hold a pointy stick. And here's maybe the most terrifying part of all, the complete lack of preparation. There was no boot camp. No one taught you how to use a sword or a shield. Nothing. One day you're tending your crops, and the very next, you're expected to stand in a line and face down armored knights with absolutely no clue what you're doing. But, before these poor guys ever even saw an enemy soldier, they had to fight a whole other battle first. Their first opponent wasn't across the field. It was the military camp itself, and just surviving it was a war in its own right. Seriously, forget any ideas you have about tents and warm meals. The reality was sleeping on the cold, hard ground, usually in the mud. You were constantly exposed to rain and cold. Hunger wasn't a possibility, it was a guarantee. And with zero sanitation, diseases like dysentery just tore through the camp. A shocking number of soldiers died before they ever even heard the sound of battle. And then came the fight itself. And let me tell you, this was no organized, strategic game of chess. It was a full-on sensory nightmare. Forget what you see in the movies, with organized lines and heroic charges. No way. It was pure, unfiltered chaos. Just a churning, screaming mass of mud and bodies with sharp bits of steel flying everywhere. You couldn't see, you couldn't think, you could only react, just desperately trying to stay alive. And the sound. My God, the sound was a physical thing. It wasn't just the clash of swords, it was the constant, unending, horrifying screams of the wounded and the dying, coming at you from every single direction. The air was thick with the smell of it. Blood. And the weapons they used were just brutal. They weren't just designed to kill. They were made to crush, to tear, to completely maim. For a guy with little or no armor, a single blow from a mace or an axe was just devastation. And underneath all of that, defining every single split second, was raw, paralyzing fear. The constant, suffocating knowledge that any moment could be your last, and that there was absolutely nowhere to run. So for the very, very few who actually survived that clash, the nightmare was far from over. The end of the battle was really just the beginning of a whole new kind of suffering. Just look at the grim options waiting for you. A simple cut that we wouldn't think twice about today could fester and become a deadly infection. If you were captured, you could be looking at torture, slavery, or just a summary execution. And even if you survived, you were likely going home with life-altering injuries and, of course, the deep, invisible scars of trauma. And that brings us to the invisible wounds. In an age where there was zero concept of mental health, what we now know as PTSD was a silent burden these survivors had to carry completely alone, forced to relive that horror, day in and day out, for the rest of their lives. So when you put all of it together, the forced conscription, the horrific conditions, the unimaginable trauma,
That whole romantic, heroic lens just shatters, doesn't it? It forces us to completely reframe how we think about the medieval soldier.
Which leads us to this one question, fundamental question. After everything they were put through, does the label hero even fit?
The conclusion, when you look at it honestly, is just undeniable. They weren't heroes choosing some glorious path. They were victims of a brutal system that saw them as nothing more than disposable pawns in a game played by kings.
I mean, the actual definition of a victim is a person harmed, injured, or killed as a result of an action. By that measure, what else could you possibly call them? They were harmed by a system that simply did not care if they lived or died. And this really leaves us with a final, pretty powerful thought. It forces us to look past the storybooks and the legends and ask ourselves, how many of the people we call heroes throughout history were in reality just ordinary people, caught in terrible circumstances, fighting for nothing more than the chance to see one more sunrise?